Is this fantastic? Hi. Okay, so it's good to have 500 people sitting to listen to this. This was supposed to be about rainmaking, okay? For those of you who don't know what rainmaking is, it's basically making money for either yourself or other people, making it rain, the concept of rainmaking, okay? It has nothing to do with dancing and hoping that it will rain. But it comes from that, because back in the old days, if you danced and it rained, you had crops and you effectively had wealth. This is going to be a little different because I recently, 2 weeks ago, finished organizing one of the biggest conferences in the world. And this was a conference called BDL Accelerate. We had 25,000 people show up. 4,000 people flew in from Europe. Steve Wozniak came, Tony Fadell came. It was a very successful conference. We're maybe second or third biggest in the world now. At the end of that conference, I came to a realization that there was something fundamentally wrong with the startup world. Okay, I've been in the startup world for 10 years, and this is the story that starts about rainmaking, and it will end on a tangent that I've been working on for just 2 weeks now. So bear with me if I lose my train of thought. This is very fresh, very, very fresh. So, 10 years ago, I was 24, okay? Young, foolish, lost, and I had traveled around the world. I studied in the US, all that, and I came to the conclusion that I wanted to be in Lebanon. I'm from Lebanon, my home country. And once I realized I wanted to be in Lebanon, it wasn't really me who realized it. My uncle realized it and told me, listen, just this is where you want to be, figure out what you want to do, where you want to be, now that you know where you want to be. So I was in this state, I had found where I wanted to be, where I belonged, okay, but I couldn't see the top of the pyramid. I don't know if you are familiar with this. This is Maslow's pyramid. It's the hierarchy of needs. It's a concept of psychology, what we aspire to. So I was at the belonging stage. I moved to Lebanon. I had this beautiful cloud that was clouding my vision of what was at the top. And I decided, okay, fuck it, I'm going to go into the startup world, okay? That was 2007. I started off working in a very, very large bank in the Middle East called Bank Audi. They handed me their entrepreneurship department. I don't know if you know anything about entrepreneurship. It's basically the antithesis of what an organization, large organization is. They give a couple of people the opportunity to do crazy things, and then at the end of the cycle, they tell them, this is not going to happen. So I spent 4.5 years doing that, and then at the end, they told me, this is not going to happen. So I moved on. I created my own startup, did very well, did a Skype call to San Francisco with a VC you may know called Kleiner Perkins, one of the top 4. And we pitched our idea. We were at the MVP stage. They got very excited. They're like, sure, we'll give you money, move to San Francisco. And I'm like, I just moved to Lebanon. Okay, this doesn't work. So anyway, we kept the company going for another year and then we shut it down. There was really very little chance of survival in Lebanon. From there, I got a little depressed. I opened up a cookie shop, okay, where I sold cookies on Twitter, okay, and I made the cookies myself. It was very successful, but I was way too young to be like a baker, at least for me, okay. So I locked up the recipe and decided, okay, now is the time. It was 2010. It was just the beginning of the hype of accelerators. I'm sure you've all heard of what an accelerator is. We're going to create startups. We're going to make so many successful startups, and we're going to make money making startups. From 2010 until 2013, we made a lot of startups. We didn't make any money. It was a very incredible journey. What was exciting about it was that we were able to turn Lebanon from a practically non-existent ecosystem to a very thriving ecosystem because our startups convinced the Central Bank of Lebanon to create a $600 million sovereign fund that would fund the ecosystem. And it's one of the biggest in the world in terms of per capita. So that created the ecosystem, and from there, the central bank asked me, please stay on, advise, and I'm like, if you're gonna have $600 million, you're gonna have to do something cool with that money. I can spend it for you, and they're like, sure, let's spend the money. And I created this conference called BDL Accelerate. And this conference, basically in the span of 3 years, this was 2014, 2015, 2016. In the span of 3 years, we took it from 1,600 attendees to 25,000 attendees. And that's when it started to rain, okay? The whole world was now looking at Beirut. All of these great speakers came. We had people from Eventbrite, from Spotify, from Apple, so on and so forth. And I had hit the pinnacle of the startup journey. 23,250 registrations, 125 speakers, 414 cities represented. Okay, this was really impressive, okay? That's 8,000 people watching Steve Wozniak. And then the sun came out, the clouds dispersed, and I realized there was no top to the pyramid. Okay, it was still a sunny day. If you've been to Lebanon, we have around 300 days of sun, so it's always like that. Okay, when it rains, but then you look up and there's no top of the pyramid. And it occurred to me that there might be something fundamentally wrong with what's happening in the world today. So I took a step back and I started reading, okay, and I'm like, why? Why did I not find the top of the pyramid? And I found this very, very interesting article in Vanity Fair about the obsession, okay, of Ayn Rand. For those of you who don't know who Ayn Rand is, she's a philosopher from the early 20th century who talked about how everything that is human is driven by self-interest. So Ayn Rand, the pretty girl in the left here, is basically the role model of every major successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, from Peter Thiel to Jack Dorsey to Travis Kalanick to so on and so forth. All of them live by her model of life. The end justifies the means. And I'm sure you all know Steve Jobs. He was also a big fan of Ayn Rand. So when you look at that and you start thinking, okay, so the culture that is driving startups around the world, that's driving the new form of entrepreneurship around the world, is a culture of self-interest. What does that mean? So 2010, Barack Obama went to Cairo. And this was before the Arab Spring, whatever that bullshit was, okay? And just as the whole world was starting to pick up on the entrepreneurship scene, London was still barely there, Paris was barely there. Very, very few countries other than the US had an entrepreneurship scene. And Obama went to the American University of Cairo and got up in front of tens of thousands of people and said, each and every one of you is an entrepreneur. And it was a very moving speech. Remember, this was before the Arab Spring. He basically convinced these thousands and thousands of Egyptians that each and every one of them could be a superhero, okay? When we talk entrepreneurs today, we don't think, okay, I'm going to build something that's going to maybe be a bakery with, you know, some nice cookies. We think, I want to be the next Steve Jobs. I want to be the next Uber. I want to create something that will create a unicorn, okay? And these people are effectively superheroes. The superhero meaning in the sense that they created something that's practically impossible. So these are the unicorns. They're over there, okay? And the problem with the unicorns is that I don't know if are you familiar with the concept Kool-Aid? Okay, this is an American concept. It's really, really nasty fake juice, okay? Which if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you drank a lot of, and it didn't taste anything like juice, but it was very colorful, okay? And basically when they say you know, drinking your own Kool-Aid means you believe the shit that you're saying, and eventually you're drinking your own shit, okay? And this is the unicorn, okay? The unicorn is not at the 0.13, it's actually off the charts, okay? Unicorns are at best 1 in a million, okay? So they're not on this chart. 1 in a million. So there aren't any unicorns in this room, okay? If we had 100 of this room, we still wouldn't have any unicorns. What does that mean? That means the unicorn, okay, is what we are aspiring to, and the whole world is modeled around the unicorns, but there's 99.999% of the human population that has no chance of ever being a unicorn. Statistically, it's just not possible, okay? So the whole world has been striving to be unicorns, but it's simply not possible because the game is not designed that way. And the rules of the game are not designed that way. 1 billion people. By 2020, there will be 1 billion unemployed people, okay, around the world. 1 billion, okay. Now, what happens when people are unemployed? They start revolutions, okay. That's what happened in the Arab Spring. It had nothing to do with wanting to change. One of the stories, I'm not sure if you've heard it, okay, in Egypt. Egypt is 90 million people. Just around the time of the Arab Spring in Egypt, the government decided to crack down on cannabis, on hashish, okay? And when they cracked down on hashish, people couldn't smoke up anymore, okay? So they woke up and they looked around and they're like, what the fuck is this? Okay? I don't have a job. I don't have a life. I can't eat. I'm living in shit, okay? And when they have nothing better to do, they revolt. Now take that 1 billion, okay, and remove 1 million, okay? Not 1 million from the billion, but 6 zeros. What are you left with? 1,000 people. There are 1,000 people who are going to create unicorns. And the rest are just going to drink the Kool-Aid, okay? So, what does that lead to? So as people are drinking the Kool-Aid, they start believing in cults. One of the most interesting things that was recently, I think, published in some psychology journal was that the reaction people have to their Apple products is the same as fundamentalist religious people to their religious doctrines. Like a Bible or a Quran is the equivalent of a MacBook for these different categories of people, okay? Like this is, they mapped their brain waves, okay? And they could see the exact same reactions in their brains. So people are now following cults. And the cults are no longer just religion, they are now products, they are brands. And if you've recently read into the valuation of Apple, Apple is no longer valued as a consumer electronics company. It's valued as a luxury brand company. So Apple is in the same process of valuation as Louis Vuitton, okay? That's how they value it today. What does that mean? That means we are no longer buying products because they are good. We are buying products because people are telling us they are good, because we're following the doctrine. Now, what do you see in this picture? Does anyone know what's this picture? Yes. Where is the Kaaba in the picture? It's that tiny black dot, okay? That tiny, tiny black dot in the center is the Kaaba. The building next to it with the clock tower, which is maybe 1 billion times bigger, okay, is a hotel for rich people who are going to pray, okay? Now, what does this image signify? It signifies that what's happening now is that we're reaching a point where there's a lot of overlap in how people feel towards their religions and how people feel towards the products that they are receiving. And why is this happening? Because we've reached a point in the world where we are almost unable to think for ourselves. We're told what to think. We see this picture and we say, wow, this is amazing. And then you realize that what's amazing about it is that little black dot. That's what's amazing. The rest is just a hotel, okay? But they have come so close together that we can barely separate them. So I was in Egypt a couple of years ago, and I was pushing the startup scene, and I was very excited about it. And this is called the Greek campus in Egypt. Remember, Egypt is 90 million people, of which I think 80 million are at poverty, or 70 million at poverty. It's massive poverty. This is the Greek campus, nice poofs, everybody's chilling, we're doing a startup conference, so on. And I decided to take a break to go outside of the campus, right behind those trees. And I didn't have a picture, so this is a simulation, but it was a lot worse than what you're going to see now. I walked into this. This was literally outside. I went from this to this, okay? And I was completely shocked. I was taken aback because I was in Egypt to convince the world, in my opinion, because I want to change the world, that entrepreneurship is going to save us, okay? And we're all going to be entrepreneurs and we're going to be successful and we're going to change the world and so on. And then I walk out and I'm like, I have so much fucking work to do, okay? Like, how am I going to reach all these people? And not only that, I realized that I had a very difficult, very, very difficult pitch to make. Because I could pitch people that they could become unicorns, that they could be wildly successful. But how do I pitch to someone something that is statistically difficult to prove and requires a lot of hard work, when the alternative, just like any religion in the world, the alternative is, if you do X, Y, Z, you're going to go to heaven. And the problem with heaven, I mean, we're all going either to hell or heaven, but the problem with hell and heaven is that nobody ever came back and said, it wasn't what I expected, okay? Nobody gets the chance to come back and say, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. But in entrepreneurship, people fail, and a lot of them result in failed marriages, failed relationships, broken families, so on. And people get up and say, this is not what I expected, this is not what I signed up for. So how do you convince the masses of people that there is an alternative to just poverty? How do you get them out of that, and not by convincing them to be entrepreneurs? So I started digging a little more, and I realized there was something happening. In 1982, this is from the US, but it's representative of the entire world. In 1982, productivity and real wages diverged. By 2006, people were working twice as hard and making less money than in 1982, okay? So all of you are effectively working harder to make less money. And the funny thing is that in entrepreneurship, and anyone who's an entrepreneur here knows this, you're expected to work 16 hours a day. You're expected to kill yourself for this company or for whoever you're working for, because that's how you're going to succeed. The dream is what's driving you, but only 1 in a million make it. So this is basically telling us that there's something broken with this culture, that we've reached a point where we are a lot more obsessed with achieving, with the end, than we are with the means. So we effectively are buddies with Ayn Rand, all of us. We're more obsessed with getting there than how we're getting there. And this is what happens. This isn't a bad thing, okay? I'm not making a political statement. This is an anomaly, okay? Nobody in their right mind thought this would happen, okay? And it did. And why did it happen? Because people are waking up, okay? They're beginning to realize that I'm working twice as much and making half as much. This doesn't make any sense. And when people wake up, they realize that there's something wrong, okay? They realize that what we believe are the superheroes of the future, the Elon Musks, the Marvel comics. I'm sure all of you have seen a Marvel comic in the last year. We are aspiring to be heroes, to be superheroes, whereas in reality, we need to aspire to be human, not superheroes. And what you see here, this pyramid, is effectively the startups that are unicorns, I think, or have become unicorns in the last 10 years. These are the only companies that made it to the unicorn stage. And if anyone can tell it well, it's Bernie Madoff. I don't know if you know this guy, okay? This guy managed to convince the world that if he takes money from them and gives them 20% year on year, that 20% is going to keep on growing no matter how the math didn't make sense. So he managed to convince thousands of people to put all of their life savings into his bank accounts, and then he basically gave them returns that didn't exist. They were just returns on paper. And when somebody came and said, hey, I want my money, he's like, oh, well, that's not going to work. So I'm not saying these are effectively pyramid schemes, but a startup, if you really think about it, there's 1 or 2 people that get 20, 30%, then 5 or 10 people that get 2 to 3%, then 10 to 100 people that get 1%, and then the rest get 0.001%. How is that any different from a pyramid scheme? So effectively, we are all striving to create pyramid schemes, okay? And this has become the culture of the world. So there I was thinking and thinking and thinking, and this has been just 2 weeks of hell, okay? And I came to the conclusion that what's missing in the world isn't entrepreneurs and success and self-interest. It's critical thinking, okay? How do you elect Donald Trump with critical thinking? It's just not possible, okay? So the US has 350 to 400 million people, okay? 50% of them who could vote were not thinking critically. And I'm not sure about Clinton being a good alternative, but like at least 50%, let's not say 100%, 50% were not using critical thinking, okay? Why? I still don't know. I think there's just so many different factors. But what this has taught me in the past 2 weeks is that I'm getting out of entrepreneurship, okay? I can't do it anymore. I'm moving into education, okay? So, like, this is the name of my new venture, which I came up with 2 days ago, okay? And it means 2 things. In Indian, in Sanskrit, I think, it refers to one of the 4, I'm very bad with the names, followers of the Buddha Hindu person. Sorry, I'm not good with this stuff. But one of them, okay, effectively goes around in the spiritual and physical realms teaching, okay? And in Japanese, it means bring to the center. So when you look at these 2 different perspectives from 2 wildly different cultures, and you bring them together, I want to teach people to come to the center. And I'm hoping I can do that without creating another startup, okay? And hopefully I'll be back in the next few years and I'll tell you that story. Thank you.